I don't even know where to begin. Maybe with last night, because last night was the moment I realized I couldn't keep living this way. My name is Monica. I'm 61 years old, and I've worked my whole life to build a sense of stability. But all of it feels meaningless when I think about what my own son did to me. Over a bowl of soup. A simple bowl of soup that didn't have enough salt. He hit me until I bled. My lips split open. My body collapsed against the cold tiles, and while I struggled to breathe through the pain, he calmly walked back to his room as if nothing had happened. No remorse, no hesitation, no acknowledgement that the woman on the floor was the same one who had carried him in her arms, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for his piano lessons and school tuition, who had sacrificed her own life so he could have every opportunity. I lay there for a long time, pressing an old rag to my mouth, tasting iron, smelling the soup that was still dripping down the cabinets. In those moments, the humiliation hurt far more than the bruises. Because the truth was staring me in the face, I wasn't his mother anymore. I was his servant, his punching bag, his possession. The next morning, I still did what I always do. I got up at 5, my body aching, my arms covered in purple marks. My lip was so swollen it hurt to speak. But there he was, Ethan, sitting at the kitchen table in his expensive gray suit, scrolling his phone, looking like the successful executive the world believed he was. He didn't even glance up at me, just barked breakfast. "Hurry up, I've got an important meeting." As if nothing had happened, as if the blood on my pillow, the terror in my chest, the trembling in my hands were just my imagination. I made his scrambled eggs with the exact amount of cheese, the toast, golden brown, the coffee black and unsweetened. I knew the rules. One mistake and I'd pay the price. A little later, his wife, Savannah, walked in, clicking across the floor in her heels, wearing a dress that looked like it cost more than my monthly pension. She kissed him on the cheek, smiled at me with that fake sweetness she only used when he was in the room, and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Davis. How are you this morning?" I wanted to scream the truth at her. "I'm bruised. I'm broken. Your husband beat me last night until I could barely stand." But I swallowed the words like I always do. I smiled. I lied. "I'm fine, thank you." When she wasn't looking, Ethan leaned toward me, still smiling for his wife, and whispered, "Remember what we talked about last night. If you ever open your mouth, you'll regret it. No one will believe you. You're just a crazy old woman living off her son's charity." And maybe he was right, because I have nothing. No savings, he's taken every cent of my pension for the past 2 years. No independence, he made me sign over half the house I bought with my own money. No voice, every bruise I cover with makeup feels like proof that I no longer exist. But something inside me shifted after that night. Maybe it was the rage burning hotter than the soup he threw in my face. Maybe it was the exhaustion of carrying his cruelty in silence. Or maybe it was the memory of who I used to be, a woman who once ran an entire law firm's office, who was trusted by judges, lawyers, and powerful men. I wasn't always this broken. That day, while he went off to work with his perfect wife on his arm, I sat alone in my kitchen, staring at the cracks in the tiles. I thought about the years I'd given him. I thought about the moment 3 years ago, when he arrived at my doorstep after his divorce looking lost, and I welcomed him home with open arms. I thought about the way he gradually chipped away at me, first with small criticisms, then control over my finances, and finally with his fists. And I thought about the terrifying truth: if I didn't do something soon, this house would become my grave. I tried to clean the kitchen the way some people pray, slowly, carefully counting the movements to keep my mind from breaking. The sunlight slid across the tile like a blade, inching toward me as the morning grew older, and with every inch it carved away one more excuse I had made for him. I'd told myself he was stressed. I'd told myself I was clumsy. I'd told myself motherhood meant endurance. But there I was, 61 years old, wiping blood off the grout lines of a house I'd bought with my own hands, pretending I couldn't smell the burn of last night's soup on the stove. I covered my bruises in the mirror with foundation he bought to help me heal, and the lie dried on my skin like a second face. By the time the doorbell chimed, I had stitched on my smile. Savannah's heels entered first, tapping a bright, brittle rhythm across my floor. Behind her came three women framed by perfume and glassy laughter, their hair smooth, their handbags sharp as verdicts. I poured coffee. I laid out the salad. I passed the pasta. I made the table look expensive with grocery store tricks I'd learned over a lifetime. And then between the plates and the staged compliments I saw her, Evelyn, my sister. The name slid across the room in Savannah's voice as if it were any other name, but something inside me buckled and stood at once. We hadn't spoken in 2 years, spite, pride, stubbornness, call it what you will, and yet the arch of her brow, the way her eyes caught on my lip, told me she could still read me like a ledger. Delicious, one of the women said. And I said thank you, in the tone of a woman who knows the only safe answer. Savannah beamed in a way that placed me squarely in the role she loved for me, devoted, tireless, silent. It's like having a housekeeper, she joked, and the word scraped something in me so raw I felt it spark. Evelyn's gaze followed the spark. She waited until I slipped into the kitchen for dessert, and then she followed, her voice soft enough to hide in the hum of the refrigerator. "Are you okay?" she asked. Not like a colleague, not like a stranger, but like blood recognizes blood. I almost told her. I almost handed her the secret, the bruises, the fear, the years. But the front door opened, and Ethan's voice flooded the hallway, smooth, bright, practiced, and I swallowed the confession until it lodged like glass. He charmed the room. He praised me with a hand that gripped my shoulder just hard enough to mean, remember. I could feel the indent of his fingers through the fabric. I could feel a future shrinking to the size of that grip. When the women left, Evelyn was last. She took my hand with a public smile and a private whisper. "We'll see each other soon," and then she was gone, leaving behind the faint promise of a bridge where I'd only known walls. The house exhaled when the door closed. He didn't. His mask slid off like a napkin. "You did well," he said, and it was not praise. It was an audit. I collected dishes. He disappeared into his room. My phone rang, a number I didn't know, a voice that introduced itself as the company accountant, polite but urgent, asking if I could come in at 3 to discuss discrepancies tied to my bank account. The world tilted. Discrepancies. My account. My name suddenly felt like a key jammed in a lock that wouldn't turn. I said yes because fear said no and hope said move, and I have learned to obey hope even when it trembles. The clock betrayed me in small, relentless steps. I watched the minutes like a deer watches the tree line. I cleaned up the last glass. I pressed powder over purpling shadows blooming anew along my jaw. I tucked my papers, my identification, my breath into my purse, and walked out quietly, as if tiptoeing past a sleeping animal with teeth. Outside, the day was blinding, a slab of sky too blue to forgive what it looked down on. I caught a bus I hadn't ridden in years, and sat by the window, hands knotted, body swaying with strangers. Every stop felt like a heartbeat I wasn't sure I deserved. The building was taller than I expected, glass the color of money, and weather reflecting a city I'd spent my life walking and barely recognized now. The elevator carried me to the 18th floor where the air changed. It smelled like lemon toner and quiet secrets. The receptionist smiled with her whole face, which made me want to cry in the worst way of all. I said my name and she said, "Right this way," and opened a door on a man with papers in front of him and a look that said this would not be simple. He introduced himself. He showed me the patterns numbers make when a person pushes them through hidden corridors and into accounts they shouldn't touch. He traced arrows from the company to my son, and from my son to me, and from me to cash I had never held in my hands. It was like being told my fingerprints were found on a weapon I had never seen. The ground went soft. I said I didn't know because I didn't. I said he held my cards because he did. I said he paid my bills because he made sure I couldn't. The man's voice gentled in the way a bridge gentles under a heavy truck. "You'll need to file a statement," he said. "It's the only way to clear your name." I walked for a long time after that, not because I had anywhere to go, but because a body keeps moving when it's been in danger long enough. I walked until the city blurred into a kaleidoscope of windows and shadows and faces that weren't looking at me. When I finally opened my front door, He was waiting in the living room, the TV flashing blue light across his cheekbones like police sirens. "Where have you been?" he asked with the bored offense of a king whose servant missed a bell. Something in me lifted its head. I told him the truth. I watched it hit him like a tide against glass, first shock, then calculation, then threat. He closed the space between us in 3 easy steps and reached for my arm, and I said, "Let go," with a voice I didn't recognize as mine. He did. For a heartbeat. For the first time in years, the fear broke and my face surfaced. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, and the sentence felt like stepping onto a floor I hoped would hold. His eyes went dark. The doorbell rang. Clarice's voice came through wood and chain, concerned, ordinary, neighborly, and the hand he'd raised settled back to his side like a weapon returning to its holster. I opened the door and found 2 women on my porch, one with a casserole and a steady gaze, the other with casual clothes and my childhood's eyes. Clarice said hello. Evelyn said she was new to the neighborhood. The performance was clumsy and perfect at once. Ethan smiled in the way that kept our street from truth and our house from witnesses. When they left, the air thinned. He promised ruin tomorrow, banks and papers and doctors who would swear my mind was slipping like gravel down a hill. I went to bed and didn't sleep. At 3 in the morning, I heard a whisper in the bushes and found at dawn a small camera tucked by Clarice's careful hands, its glass eye pointed gently at my kitchen window, as if it were waiting to become my memory when mine was denied. The morning cracked open, gray and heavy, as if the sky itself knew the weight pressing down on my chest. Ethan was already awake, dressed in his best black suit, the one he reserved for moments when he needed the world to see a man of power, not the monster I knew he was. His voice was sickly sweet when he said, "Good morning, Mom. I hope you slept well." It wasn't kindness, it was theater. I had lived with him long enough to know the curtain always rose before an act of cruelty. He spread butter across toast with a calm so rehearsed it made my skin crawl. He spoke about forgiveness, about how maybe he'd been too hard on me, about how I deserved respect. The words hung in the air like perfume sprayed over rot. Then the truth revealed itself. "We're going to the bank together today." He told me I would explain everything, that I had authorized the transfers, that I knew exactly what was happening with my money. His trap had been reset, his net pulled tighter. I said no. My voice was trembling but steady enough. His smile evaporated. "Of course you are, Mom," he answered. Then came the threats, how everything in my life existed only because he allowed it. The roof, the food, the bed, even my sanity. He spoke of doctors, of dementia, of witnesses ready to swear that I was slipping into confusion. Savannah, her friends, all part of his manufactured narrative. The ground beneath me shifted my mind, struggling to tell itself that I wasn't crazy, that his lies weren't truth. He told me to be dressed by 10, to smile, to sign, to obey. When the door closed behind him, I collapsed into the kitchen chair, choking on rage as much as fear. That was when the knock came soft, urgent from the back door. Clarice. She slipped inside like a breath of air I hadn't felt in years. I heard everything she whispered, her hands shaking as they gripped mine. Then she told me the camera had caught it all. His threats, his blackmail, his demand that I perjure myself. "We have evidence, Monica. Enough to take to the district attorney, enough to end this. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've lived without it." It fluttered inside me like a bird, weak and frantic. But when Clarice said we had to go now, I felt the cage slam shut again. Fear clenched my throat. "He'll find out. He'll kill me." Clarice's voice sharpened. "If you go to the bank, you'll become his accomplice. But if you come with me, we can stop him before he destroys you." I looked at the clock. 8:30. 1 hour before he returned. I grabbed my purse, my documents, and followed her out into the morning. Each step from the house felt like stepping off a cliff, but it was also a step into something I hadn't touched in years: courage. The district attorney's office was plain and unremarkable, fluorescent lights buzzing above small cubicles, but to me it felt like a cathedral. Brenda, the attorney Clarice had promised, listened with sharp, attentive eyes. She reviewed the recordings, her jaw tightening at every word Ethan spat on tape. Then she looked at me and said, "What your son has done constitutes multiple crimes: domestic abuse, financial fraud, obstruction of justice. We can arrest him today, but we need you to file a formal complaint. Are you ready?" My hands trembled, but my voice did not. "Yes, I'm ready." For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting. By the time Ethan came home at 9:30, police were already waiting at the door. He screamed, he raged, he broke dishes and cursed my name, but they cuffed him and dragged him from the house that had once been his stage. I stood in the doorway, my body trembling not with fear, but with release. For 3 years I had lived under his thumb. That morning, I took my first breath of freedom. And yet freedom is never simple. That night I listened to his voicemails from jail. 5 messages, each one crafted like a dagger. First apologies, then tears, then guilt. "Mom, please, I love you. Don't leave me here. You're all I have." My son's voice. The boy I raised, the child I once held, was weaponized against me. It tore at me in ways his fists never could. I wanted to believe I had broken free. But even from a cell, he knew how to chain me with love and regret. The courthouse smelled of dust and ink, like every memory of my working years pressed into paper and stacked in files. Ethan sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his hair still perfectly combed, as if appearance could erase the chains at his wrists. When his eyes met mine, the mask of the crying son from his voicemails was gone. What stared back was fury contained by walls, rage dressed up as control. Savannah sat a few benches behind him, dressed in elegance that looked brittle now, her face pale and drawn. I had expected indifference, maybe contempt. What I saw instead was shame, raw and unguarded. It shook me. For years, I thought she was blind to the bruises, the flinches, the way my voice shrank when Ethan's shadow passed over me. Maybe she had seen. Maybe she had chosen silence. The judge listened as I told my story, my voice trembling but steadying with each sentence. I spoke of bruises hidden beneath foundation of threats, whispered between compliments of stolen money funneled through my accounts. I spoke of nights awake on the kitchen floor cleaning blood from tile. At times, my words broke into sobs, but I forced myself to continue. The truth, once it began spilling, refused to stop. Then the judge played the recordings Clarice's camera had captured. Ethan's voice filled the room. "You'll sign whatever I tell you. If not, I'll have you declared incompetent. No one will believe a crazy old woman." His words echoed against the courtroom walls, and for the first time, I saw his arrogance falter. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him. When the ruling came, it felt like thunder in my bones. Bail denied. Ethan would remain in custody until trial. He erupted, shouting, thrashing, calling me a liar, promising vengeance. Guards restrained him, but his words chased me out of the courtroom. "When I get out, you'll regret this. Every day you'll regret it." Afterward, Savannah approached me trembling. For the first time, her voice wasn't laced with performance. "I need to apologize," she said, eyes filling with tears. She confessed that Ethan had threatened her too, that she had seen the bruises, but feared losing everything if she spoke. She had been silent out of cowardice, she said, and now she wanted to make it right. She had already contacted a lawyer, already planned to testify against him. She had discovered he was stealing from her as well, draining her accounts like he drained mine. In that moment, I saw not an enemy, but another victim trying to climb out of the same pit. For weeks I lived in Clarice's house, wrapped in the safety of walls that did not echo with footsteps at night. Still, I jumped at every knock, every phone ring. Fear lingers in the body like smoke in fabric. You wash it, you air it out, but still it clings. The DA called it trauma. I called it the ghost of my son. And then came the letters. Handwritten, carried through lawyers and intermediaries, each word sharp as glass. He reminded me of secrets from my years at Sullivan and Associates cases where I had done what I was told, moving papers, altering files at the command of men who signed my paycheck. I hadn't understood, not fully, that I might have been breaking the law. But Ethan had found the documents, photographed them, and now he wielded them like knives. Drop the charges, Mom, or the world will know what you did. They'll put you in prison. Your face will be in the papers. The old terror returned, coiling around my spine. I thought I had escaped his grasp, yet even behind bars he found a way to tighten it. Another letter arrived worse than the first, this one, with photographs of my handwriting on altered memos. Accusations of tax evasion from unreported gifts, decades old. Threats to expose me until my name was rubble. Brenda. My attorney listened and said the words I dreaded. He isn't bluffing. Technically, what you did could be considered illegal. The best way forward is to confess before he can weaponize it. Confess. My mistakes, my ignorance, my blind obedience, they would all be laid bare. But Brenda was right. If I stripped myself of secrets, Ethan would lose his last weapon. So we planned. A press conference. A statement of truth. I put on the gray dress I once wore for board meetings, straightened my back, and decided I would no longer live in shadows of shame. For the first time in years, I was going to speak without fear of what my son or anyone could use against me. The press room buzzed with voices, the click of cameras, the shuffle of pens against notepads. For a moment I thought my knees would buckle. But then I remembered every bruise I had painted over every night. I had pressed a rag to my lip every morning. I had served coffee to the man who called himself my son while my soul withered. That memory steadied me more than any podium ever could. I spoke. I confessed. I told them about the Williams case from 15 years ago, how I had followed orders to reorganize files, never realizing I was erasing evidence. I admitted to unreported bonuses, cash gifts from grateful clients, mistakes I carried unknowingly for decades. I laid my flaws bare before the world because secrets had become Ethan's sharpest blade, and I was done letting him hold it to my throat. There were gasps, flashes, whispers, but there was also silence. The kind of silence that comes when truth, no matter how flawed, rings louder than lies. Brenda explained to the press how abusers manipulate not just with fists, but with blackmail, how my son had weaponized my mistakes to keep me bound. By the time we finished, the narrative was no longer about my shame. It was about Ethan's cruelty. That afternoon, Raphael Miller, Ethan's boss, met me privately. His voice carried the gravity of a man who had seen too much deception. He told me Ethan hadn't just stolen $50,000, he had embezzled over $130,000 in 2 years, forged contracts, even sold company secrets. Then, to my shock, Raphael offered me a job. He said my 40 years at Sullivan and Associates, my precision, my experience were exactly what they needed to rebuild. He offered me $4,000 a month benefits and $50,000 in compensation. I could hardly breathe. For years, I had been treated like a servant in my own home, and suddenly someone saw me as valuable again. I accepted. Not out of greed, but out of hunger. The hunger to feel alive, respected, useful. For the first time in a long time, my future felt possible. The trial came months later. I stood once again in a courtroom, this time not as a trembling victim, but as a woman reclaiming her voice. Savannah testified too, her words a mirror to mine, her shame laid beside my own. Together we painted a picture of a man who had hidden behind charm while rotting everything he touched. The jury found him guilty on all counts: domestic abuse, fraud, blackmail, embezzlement. The judge's gavel fell like thunder. 10 years in prison. Ethan's face twisted with rage, his voice spitting promises of revenge even as guards dragged him away. But this time his threats didn't land. They scattered like ash in the wind. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my house, room by room. The broken dishes were replaced, the photographs rehung. The bruises faded from my skin, though not from my memory. Clarice remained by my side, her friendship, the kind of lifeline that deserves hymns. Evelyn and I repaired the bridge we had both let crumble. Sometimes she comes over with wine and we laugh like sisters again. And sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I still hear Ethan's voice. Not the man who threatened me, but the boy who once held my hand on his first day of school. That ache will never leave. Love and grief are cruel twins. But I've learned that acknowledging the ache doesn't mean surrendering to it. It means carrying it honestly without letting it define me. If you are listening to my story right now, maybe you see yourself in it. Maybe you know the weight of silence, the shame of secrets, the fear of someone you should have been able to trust. If you do, please hear me. You are not powerless. You are not alone. And no chain, no matter how tight, is unbreakable. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, if it made you feel less alone, please like, share, and subscribe. And tell me in the comments what part of my story spoke to your heart, because your words might be the spark of courage for someone else still living in silence.